Did you know rice is the oldest known food still widely consumed today? Archaeologists can date its consumption back to around 5000 BC. So, that leads us to a really important question. What has changed? Is rice now making us fat? Or are there other key elements that are driving this growing epidemic of obesity and diabetes? So our main questions in the next two episodes are this. Is white rice healthy? Is rice fattening? Can rice be used for weight loss? And most importantly, as a diabetic, can we eat rice and how often? If you'd like to know the answers to these questions, then I do have an episode you do not want to miss. Now, as I am a brand new channel, I do need you to hit those alerts, the notification button. That'll let you know when the next episode will be released, which is that little gray bell right on the corner of your screen. Reminder, if you are new to YouTube, clicking that bell will always let you know when the next episode is ready, because there's going to be a part 2 of this series. Most importantly, you're going to want to subscribe. And if you like what you've heard today, that like button. Now, in part 1, we will go over some very valuable statistics on rice. We will get a really good, solid nutritional base for part 2. Then, in part 2, we will unveil the reasons why rice has had a bad rap, how to possibly incorporate it into a diet for both weight loss and blood glucose control, all wrapped up into 4 simple, practical tips. So, let's begin by talking about some interesting facts about rice. Now, rice is the second in terms of worldwide production after corn. But corn's production is mostly used for purposes other than for human consumption. So it is actually rice as the single most important grain for humans around the world. Asia alone produces about 90% of the world's rice. Did you know the 2 top Japanese car manufacturers were named after rice? Toyota means bountiful rice field, and Honda means main rice field. I love those facts. Now, some nutritionalists call rice an empty source of calories, and they recommend just avoiding it. Okay? And others say rice in moderation is just fine. Which is it? Oh, our beloved internet, chocked full of quarterback experts, all repeating the same thing, looking to grab that headline attention. You're glad you got the Resilient Diabetic here. So how are we going to do this? We're going to start off by looking at what's known as the Japanese paradox. And what is that? The Japanese eat rice at just about every meal, and they live a long time. So the next questions I always get asked are, if the Japanese eat rice at every meal, then why shouldn't I be able to eat potato chips and soda, which are also carbohydrates, and live to 110? Believe me, that silly argument is made all the time. As of 2017, Japan's obesity rate was around 4.3. Here in the States, you want to guess? It's about 36. And then other rice-eating countries like Vietnam, it's like 2.1%. Why? We'll go over some small little details here, but I'll give you some more facts later on. For one, if you haven't noticed, in Japan, you end up walking everywhere. So energy expenditure is higher. If you go back to one of my episodes where I discussed the energy balance equation, what I'll do is I'll set up a little white box above you on that screen. You're able to click it. You'll see it pop up. It'll take you to that video. Second, when it comes to their food, their portion sizes are smaller. So one also has to take into account the accompaniments. They are different. Now, on average, We consume about 3,700 calories per person per day here in the States. In Japan, it's around 2,700 per person per day. But yet, every meal for the Japanese involves a serving of rice. Adding to the paradox, Japan has the longest average life expectancy in the world. How old? 84 years old. Where there are over 2 million over the age of 90. So, the latest estimates are there are about 2.1 billion people, nearly 30% of the world's population, are either obese or overweight. I'll repeat that. Over 30% of the world's population are either obese or overweight. The rise in global obesity rates and diabetes will only get worse. Some are already calling this the Black Death. Can we blame the rice? We'll go into details as to why or why not. All right. So the next question we've got to ask ourselves is, what is the nutritional value of rice? Now, white rice is about 90% carbohydrate, 8% protein, and about 2% fat. White rice contains some magnesium, phosphorus, manganese, selenium, iron, folic acid, and niacin. But, as we already know, white rice is low in fiber. 1 cup of enriched rice does have about 23% of the recommended daily value intake of folic acid and B vitamins. We're going to use this word enriched rice. What is that? It's critically important based on where you get your rice. And this is how it works. When rice is processed into white rice, a great deal of nutritional value is actually lost. The fiber, the nutrient-rich outer bran, is stripped, leaving behind the germ and the endosperm. In other words, it's like this polishing process. And as a result, white rice is not terribly nutritious. So what do the producers of rice do? After it's been stripped, they add the vitamins and minerals back in after it's been processed. They either use a pellet version or a spraying process. All right? This process also increases the cooking quality, the shelf life, and the tastiness, but unfortunately, as we know now, it comes at the reduced nutritional value. Starch, our key word for today, is the most common form of carbohydrate in rice. And it's made up of these very, very long chains of glucose. 2 key words you're going to want to know: amylose and amylopectin. Rice that is high in amylose, such as basmati rice, does not stick together. On the other hand, rice that is low in amylose, high in amylopectin, is sticky after cooking. Heard of sticky rice? So what is starch? Now, starch is, they call it a complex carbohydrate because of its molecular structure. Simply meaning, it's just a long chain of just glucose molecules linked together. Just imagine this long extended chain of purely sugar molecules. Starch is not only found in rice, but in corn, wheat, beans, potatoes, and many other vegetables too. Right? We discussed the 2 types of starch, amylose and amylopectin. Now, what are the differences between the two, and how's that going to affect you? And I've got to keep this as uncomplicated as possible. So we'll begin with amylose. Now, amylose is the smaller version. It contains between 500 to about 20,000 molecules of glucose connected together in that chain. The difference is that that chain is twisted into this helix, forming this structure that slows the digestion of the sugar. So the enzymes have a harder time breaking it apart. So amylose is slowly digested and absorbed. For us diabetics and those looking to lose fat and weight, amylose can keep blood sugars a bit more stable because it doesn't cause those large spikes in blood sugars. Now, whereas amylopectin, it's a much larger structure than amylose. It's made up of millions of glucose molecules that are branched out into the crystalline form. This structure or form makes the glucose really easily cleaved during digestion. What does that do? Well, it's more rapidly absorbed. So one may see a kind of a temporary spike in blood sugars followed by one being hungry again because of the drop in blood sugars. Now, in episode 3, Do Fruit Juices and Smoothies Kill?, we discussed the very important physiological process of how carbohydrates are broken down by the body into the simple sugar form. What were they? Do you remember? They were glucose, fructose, and galactose. If you haven't seen that episode, look for the white box. I'll set it up for you again, and that'll take you directly to that episode. And that way you get to view part of the equation that puts and ties everything together. And if you remember that video, where does starch begin to be broken apart? The mouth, with the enzyme salivary amylase. That's where those amylopectin chains of glucose begin to start coming apart, kind of like cotton candy in your mouth. It just starts that process where the glucose molecules get cut and broken apart. And then they are completely broken apart into the single glucose molecules by that small intestine. So it is absorbed into the bloodstream as single glucose molecules. And here's a fact to know. About 70 to 80% of the total natural starch in plants is made up of that larger amylopectin, the easily broken down one. We briefly mentioned earlier different rices have different ratio of those starches. So one must know what kind of rice is being eaten. Basmati rice, sticky rice. The trick here is that amylose does not gelatinize during the cooking process. This starch tends to cook a little more fluffy, and you'll obviously notice the grains are separate. Why? It retains more starch. So now that we know this, we can quickly discuss the types of rice, and we'll keep this simplistic as possible. First of all, we've got long grain rice, long grain white rice. That cooks up fluffy and separate, has much less fiber, but is enriched with nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. Again, depending on where you are in your source of rice. Some may have nothing in there. You've got your medium grain rice. It has more amylopectin in the grains. So a softer outer layer releases starch during the cooking process, so it cooks up creamy. Short grain rice, even more amylopectin in the grains, releases a lot of starch during the cooking process, so it becomes even more creamier when cooked. The short grain rice is usually used for risotto. It releases all that amylopectin during the cooking process, so that finished dish is creamy and has that real soft, velvety kind of mouthfeel. And finally, brown rice. We won't get into discussion which one's better at this point. What I will say is that only the hull has been removed during the processing. The bran is retained, which results in a rice with a higher fiber content and nutrient content. The one thing you need to know about brown rice is that it's going to take a little longer to cook than white rice because the outer layer is harder. So cooking times must be adjusted with that. Got it? Now that we know what rice is, we will in part 2 discuss the mistakes most make when it comes to rice consumption. How to incorporate rice into a healthy diet, how rice can be a part of your weight loss plan, and for us diabetics, we will discuss those really questions that are of paramount to our health. Can rice help maintain and control our blood sugars? This is especially important for those cultures and parts of the world where rice is a staple for every meal. So if you found this first part helpful, please hit those alerts, the notification button, that gray bell, the subscribe button, and if you like what you heard, the like button. It is super, super, super important for us brand new channels. The more you hit those alerts, the more YouTube promotes the channel, the more people get to see this. That's why I ask. In the comment section below, feel free to tell me, what kind of rice do you use? And Is it a part of your daily diet too? Would you recommend the rice, and why? So, have a great day, a productive week, and we will see you soon with part 2.